you think that it's possible, even in a situation of very strong confrontation between United States and China, to have a minimum level of agreement and cooperation, just to avoid the worst, to create a common field, the maintenance for a common field where to fight and compete?
Not yet. I mean, keep in mind that China has about 400 nuclear warheads right now. The Russians are exporting enriched uranium to the Chinese in unprecedented amount, and the Chinese are on a path to building 1,500 nuclear warheads within the next 10 years. There are no arms control agreements between the US and China on nuclear weapons, and the ones that exist between the Americans and the Russians are falling apart. So, I mean, in that, set against that backdrop, where that was the most obviously necessary and dangerous area, where some basic level of transparency and engagement between these powers needs to happen, we're very, very far from AI agreements between the Americans and the Chinese. Furthermore, the export controls on semiconductors that presently exist from the United States, that the Americans are driving with allies in the EU and in Asia, are the very semiconductors that the Chinese will find necessary to drive their own AI advances. In other words, the Americans are proactively attempting to contain China's AI development through these semiconductor export controls. This is a very big speed bump for China. So it's very hard to imagine in that environment that you're going to have the creation of new architecture between the Americans, Chinese, and others in the near term to try to regulate some of this AI authority. There are lots of other things that you can do. I mean, Paolo was talking about the new EU announcement on AI regulation that's just come out in the past hours. I do want to be clear, though, that AI, and he knows this as well, is a very democratized technology. So first you can have what it is that these companies can actually do to roll out. And right now they're playing whack-a-mole, right? They have one problem and that one set of hallucinations, one set of hate speech, and then they'll try to police that. And someone will find another way to use these AI tools to do something disruptive, and they'll police that. And that's an area where the regulation can limit what they do. But let's keep in mind that at the same time that you have ChatGPT-4 that's being rolled out by these companies, you also have GPT 3.5 that is being run on individual laptops without any of these restrictions. And if you want to use your ChatGPT 3.5 to help you to code spear phishing that will be tailored to go after an individual, there's no restriction on that. Figure out the best way to get a lethal autonomous drone programmed and used against an enemy, there's no restriction on that. You're using that as an individual tinkerer or as a bad actor. So it's not just the problem of regulation, it's also the problem of proliferation of these technologies into the hands of millions and millions of people. These technologies will not just be controlled by a small number of companies. Now, that's a great thing in terms of productivity, but it's a horrible thing in terms of security. And both of those things will happen simultaneously.
So what can we do? I remember that you spoke about the possible role of UN, but it's very difficult.
I do believe that the United Nations is a big part of this because, you know, again, using the climate change analogy, when the UN came together and created an intergovernmental panel on climate change, it was not because the UN has a lot of power. I mean, you know, it's like, how many divisions does the Pope have? How many divisions does the Secretary General have? About the same, right? I mean, this is not going to drive outcomes, but they had all of the scientists together, and in over the course of a few years, they got everyone to agree that climate change was a problem, and they defined it. And you now have, because of the UN, you have 195 countries that get together that say there's 1.2 degrees of climate change. It's 420 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. It's driven by humanity. It's not just a cyclical process. And that means that even if you don't have international cooperation, if everyone agrees on what the fundamental problems are, then any efforts that are made to respond to that problem, even if by an individual bank or corporation or charity or government, will be in the same direction. And so you do have an immense amount of effort and investment towards responding to creating a post-carbon energy environment. That is precisely what we do not have in the AI space right now and what we need. We need global scientists and coders and public policy experts and bureaucrats to come together under a UN framework to identify the problem, the urgency, the imminence, who the key players are. They're not going to fix it, but you're much better aligned to fixing it if you agree on the problem. Right now, we don't have that. Right now, we have different people touching different parts of the elephant, and that's going to get you. That's a road for chaos. That's not a road for solution.